From the WNIN Tri-State Public Media Center in downtown Evansville, I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street. The Ursuline Sisters of Mount St. Joseph have called the community of Maple Mount in western Kentucky their home since 1874. That's when the first sisters arrived on a flatboat into the wilderness to run a school for girls, and their first meal at Maple Mount, this is always neat, watermelon and buttermilk. Now, in the following years, the sisters opened dozens of schools, a 4-year college, and a retreat center. Hope and Firm Faith is a new book telling the story of the Ursuline sisters, and reading it reminded me of my mother's early education at St. Vincent Orphanage in Vincennes, a self-sufficient school with a dairy, bakery, and farmland. My mother, Helen, told me the sisters taught her to cherish her blessings and be thankful for them. Now, here to share the story of the Ursuline sisters is the author of Hope and Firm Faith, Dan Heckel, and Sister Ruth Garries, a native of Evansville, celebrating 70 years as an Ursuline sister. And Sister Garries is a former president of Brescia University in Owensboro. So welcome to both of you. Good to have you here at 2 Main Street. Dan, let's start with you. Why is it so important to tell the story of the Ursuline sisters?
Well, thank you, David. Well, it's because it's a great story.
It is.
I worked for the Ursulines now for almost 15 years. And for many of those years, somebody, when I would talk about the sisters or, what they've done, somebody would say, is there a book about this? This would be a great book. And I'd say, it would be a great book. And I didn't think I would be the one to write it, but it would make a good book. So so finally that opportunity arose, and I spent 4 years on this book and learned so much more that I even knew already. So it's a fascinating look at women who are very courageous and very tough, and had to persevere through things that most people would not understand.
You have some great stories in this book, and a lot of pictures as well. 693 pages, Dan Heckel. That's a lot of work, and a lot of references in here too. So it's a great read, and it's a great history. It really is a great history. Now let's go back now to the Middle Ages. And the founder of the Ursuline Order, St. Angela Merici, who eventually settled in Brescia, Italy, the namesake of Brescia University. So, Sister Ruth, tell us about St. Angela.
Well, St. Angela Merici was a peasant girl in Desenzano, Italy, which is very close to Brescia. Brescia's a big city, and Desenzano's a country place, or was.
This is in northern Italy, right?
Northern Italy, And as she was growing up, her parents were semi-literate, I think, and she learned the lives of the saints and was a very devout young woman. And one day her sister died, and she was always worried whether her sister was in heaven or not. And one day she had a vision. The story, these stories, how they grow and how they change. But she was out in the fields picking grapes or something, and she had a vision where she saw women on a ladder, a stairway, going up and down and singing and looking very happy. And there she saw her sister in the middle of it. But that was part of the beginning of her desire to found a community, but she didn't know that then. She just gathered women around her and eventually moved to Brescia and formed these women into a community. And the apocryphal story is that she taught school, but she never had a school, and she never did anything that was formally education. Mm-hmm. She was reaching out to the poor and the needy, helping people who were in grief because their sons had been killed in a war that was going on then. And so in 1535, she was quite old, and she thought it was time to formalize this. So I think it was 29 young women who made their vows, and we always celebrate that day. And November 25th is a Foundation Day. And
now, there was a pilgrimage, I think, an Angela pilgrimage in 1996 to Prussia?
There have been lots of them. There have been lots of them.
I think it was
That
the
was
first one. The first one there. And so this is like, well, let's see, in the 1500s, the printing had started, so they're finally getting some printed word out there. But I guess before that, just the scribes were putting out, and everything was in Latin. So there were very few literate people at that time, I'm sure.
Right.
Now, her words that echo through the centuries have hope and firm faith in God. And Sister Angela was eventually canonized in, I think, 1807. Was that right? And to become a saint, that takes, was it that vision, you think, that got her?
I'm not sure about that, but probably not, because some kind of miracle is normally required. Although they cheat on that sometimes. When the person is very holy, they say, oh well, and they go ahead and canonize them. So I'm not sure about that.
Okay. But anyway, she's a saint.
Yes, she
Saint
is. She's been
Angela.
a saint for a while.
And she's patron saint of the sick, disabled, and physically challenged, and grieving parents. And that kind of goes back to your story about taking in people who were sad and indigent into a community of women.
She would go and live with widows sometimes, so they took her in, but then she ministered to them.
Now, the Ursuline sisters, a big community in Germany, of course, and they came to America in 1727, moved west to Louisville, beginning the so-called Kentucky Holy Land, right, Dan?
Yeah, well, the Kentucky Holy Land actually probably predates even the Ursulines. The central Kentucky area, you had a lot of people that came down, Catholics, who had left Europe for religious freedom and ended up in Maryland. And then some of those folks came down into Kentucky and landed in Bardstown, Marion County, those kind of areas. It's sort of they just kind of call it the Kentucky Holy Land because everybody there was Catholic for a while. But a lot of our sisters ended up coming from there. We also had schools that operated there as well. And it's, and again, some of those folks actually ended up moving to Davis County at some point in time in the 1800s. So.
Now, what was the religious makeup of America then, a British colony, and of course until late in the 1700s? What was the religious makeup? Were there a lot of Catholic communities?
People from Maryland started coming into that area south of Louisville, but I don't have those dates.
I know Maryland was a big religious Catholic area,
Right.
definitely.
The Baltimore Catechism and all that stuff that you hear about in the old
And of course, Bardstown was the first diocese west of the Alleghenies, and so that area there was where the Catholic people migrated to, and many of the names that you could find in Marion County, you also find in Davis County, and in that area around Davis County.
It's sort of bizarre that there were like 4 dioceses in America in these early days when they were like, it was New York, I think it was New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and Bardstown, Kentucky.
Which is now Louisville.
Which was all the wilderness area, probably. That was the west at the time. Now, let's go back to 1874. That was the journey to Davis County from Louisville. It was 5 sisters, wasn't it?
5 sisters, right.
That took that trip. And there was a reenactment of that flatboat journey in 2004, a 155-mile trip organized by Sister Amelia.
Thank you.
And do you know Sister Amelia?
Oh, we all know Sister Amelia.
And the book wouldn't exist without Sister Amelia. She was one who came to me and said, "Hey, I want you to write this book." And I thought, oh, okay.
So she got this thing organized, and they had a boat built for it?
Right, yeah. There was a fellow in Gallatin, Tennessee, who built boats and reenacted things like that. He'd been on all these rivers, and the first price that he gave her, she said, "Well, we're on a committee here, and this is as much money as we can spend on this." And he said, "I'll tell you what, how about I just lease the boat to you there?" So he did that. Then he ended up giving it to us, I think. But yeah, it's fascinating. it was before my time there. Of course, Sister Ruth may remember what it was like at that time, but the people, they stopped at all the places where the sisters had stopped on the original journey. And I mean, the crowds were enormous, and people really generated. And of course, the Catholic Church was going through a lot of negative times during those in the early 2000s. And so a lot of people said this really gave us a little bit of something to be proud of again. So it served so many things, and it was a way to kind of get the Ursuline Sisters name out there a little bit. And I think it exploded in popularity way more than anybody thought that it was going to. But had their own struggles there a few times. But
Angela's Ark,
Yes.
the name of the boat. And I know Scott Simon from NPR interviewed the sisters about this journey. So it got some national attention as well. The Angela's Ark. Now, the original flatboat left from the Falls of Ohio, but this one left from New Albany,
Right.
the amphitheater there. Big crowd to see them off. And I know on the journey there was, I guess, a little bit of a miracle that occurred. It was a foggy time on the river. I know I've been on the river before with the towboat, and when that fog rolls in, it's kind of frightening. You really don't know where you're going. But something happened, didn't it?
all right, Sister Amelia tells the story that they had a schedule to keep because they were going to hit all these different dock in different communities, and people were waiting for them there. And so they had to leave at like 9:30, something like that, 9:15 in the morning. Well, they got up in the morning, and there's this dense fog. And of course, this is it's basically a tugboat pushing this flatboat. And the captain said, well, we can't go. We're not going to. It's definitely not going to be lifted by 9:15. And Sister Amelia said, well, we have to leave by 9:15. And he's like,
We're
well,
on a schedule.
we're on a schedule here. We've got to do this. And he said, well, we'll see, but I don't think that's going to happen, of course. And then the sisters just went and prayed that the fog would lift, and by 9:15 the fog had lifted, and they were on their way and kept on schedule.
And the captain never doubted her again.
He never doubted her again.
Definitely. Now, the boat, I understand, is on display.
Right, I believe it's in Memphis. Is that right?
Would you say Mud Island?
Mud Island out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had it at the Mount for. They kind of surprised us on the day that it arrived back at Maple Mount that they were going to donate it back to the community, and it was there still when I came in 2007. It was still on the property. When we'd have school groups out, and they would get on it and learn the history of the project. But I can't remember exactly when. But I know we donated it back to. They said we would donate it if it would be used for educational purposes. So it was donated to the Mud Island Museum there near Memphis. And so,
I'm sure it's a lot more seaworthy than the original flatboat.
Yeah.
Sure.
well, they both made it. So
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's a miracle right there.
Yeah.
Now, back in 1874, when those original sisters arrived in the Owensboro area, I understand there was no one there to greet them. They just kind of showed up.
That's right. Well, no cell phones back then. So, yes, there was some miscommunication from when they left Louisville to reach Father Paul Volk, who is the one who had requested the sisters to open this new school. And so, mass communication was not a thing back then. So they arrived, and no one knew they were coming yet. No one knew what day they were coming, and so they just kind of. Luckily, there was a woman who's from Davis County, who had moved to Owensboro. I'm sorry, had moved from. Anyway, they knew her, and they were able to contact her, and she put them up. Mrs. Stroll put them up for the night, and then the next day, they thought, well, maybe they'll come, but I don't think there was a phone probably at Maple Mount. So her husband said, "We'll just put you on the wagon here, and I'll take you out there myself." And so literally, they showed up, and they were still building the school, and there wasn't anything on the walls, and
No food.
no food.
Yeah, that's the watermelon and buttermilk adventure. Now, Father Volk, interesting. Father Paul Joseph Volk was the priest there who welcomed them, and he was quite the pioneer, wasn't he?
Oh, amazing! He had come from Germany. Sister Ruth knows quite a bit about Father Volk.
Well, go ahead, Sister Ruth.
Well, he was I was ordained in Fulda, Germany. He was from a little village around there, and he wanted to become a missionary in the United States. I suppose in the United States, that's where he landed. Mm-hmm. And he was sent to Louisville, and at that time he was still learning English. He wasn't a great student, but he had enough zeal to make up for that. And he was asked to come to Davis County and to take over the church at St. Alphonsus, which is now at the bottom of the hill, and we're on the top of the hill in that area. And when he got there, the church had just burned down. And the story of the Ursulines and Father Volk is full of that kind of thing that, you expect one thing and something else happens. Mm-hmm. So his first thing was to build back the church. And then he looked on the hill, and there was a school that had been there, and it had burned down also. They heated the heating systems they had were very dangerous. So Sisters of Loretto had this school, and they had gone back home after it burned. They just gave up and went back.
So then they're going to go to bricks.
That's right.
That's right.
Bricks, yes. So, and then the miracle of the bricks,
right.
Dan Heckel.
Yeah, it's a famous story. Yeah, Father Volk had actually learned how to make bricks to rebuild St. Alphonsus, and a local Owensboro person had taught him how to do this. And so when it was time to build the academy, he decides to make his bricks. This is the story of the miracle bricks that everybody at Maple Mount knows. But so you have to I don't know anything about making bricks, but you have to get them to a certain temperature so that they'll be hard enough to support a building. And they just couldn't get it hot enough. And so there were area men kind of surrounding this, waiting for these bricks to get hard, and they just were soft. And Father Volk said, you guys go home, get some rest, come back in the morning, we'll start building school. The bricks will be ready. And you know how they are with the priests. Okay, Father, sure, whatever you say. And they're like, this poor deluded old fella doesn't know what he's talking about. And they say he stayed up all night praying over the bricks, and when the men came back in the morning, they were ready. And that's what we built Mount St. Joseph Academy out of. And they're still there.
The miracle bricks.
Yeah.
Now, numerous buildings at the site. It's no longer an academy, no longer a school for young women there. The students are gone, but the sisters and staff remain. And you have a pretty good staff there, number?
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what our numbers are, but they're probably around 70 or so, maybe not that.
How many sisters are there?
Around 70.
Okay. Oh, a staff member per sister. That's good. It's a good ratio. Now, the original building with those miracle bricks still stands, but understand that building's days are numbered.
Yeah, very sad. It was an academy until 1983, and then we transformed it into the Mount St. Joseph Conference and Retreat Center, and it served in that role all the way up until COVID hit, and we closed, of course, the campus down like lots of people had to do. In the interim there, when it's been closed, they discovered that the foundation of it, those bricks that are the foundation of it, were crumbling. Literally, every time it rains, more of the foundation just washes away. And so the original building, it had an addition in 1882, it had an addition in 1904, it had an addition in 1962, and it had an addition in in the 90s as well. So people look at it and think it's one building. It's actually 4 or 5 buildings over the time, and they're all interconnected. And so the oldest buildings were really not structurally sound anymore, and the sisters had decided as a community, sad as that is, that it was going to be cost prohibitive to try to do what it took to actually keep those going. So, yeah, they are going to come down at some point in time. There still hasn't scheduled for that. But so it's really made, and of course, I didn't know this when we started the book, but I mean, it's made the history of the place even more sort of, prominent for folks who went to school there like Sister Ruth did, or have come out for retreats, or just know the sisters. So lots of people coming back. The sisters this past summer had a sort of a farewell ritual for the building. So it's really nice. I mean, and people have been more interested in learning the history. So the book came out at a good time for that.
Yes, preserve that history. Now, there's a statue in front of the original building?
Yes, there's a statue of St. Joseph there. This is one of the things that if you do a history book and you have a moment like this that you just geek out and tell everybody about. And so I just bored everybody to death with this story. So I will bore you with it too, David.
Well, I don't think this is boring at all. Go ahead.
So when the second edition, the first edition was in 1882, and there's a little niche in the top of the building. And Father Volk was there for that, and they commissioned this statue of St. Joseph. and they put St. Joseph in this niche up on the second floor.
It's way up high.
Yeah, way up high. And at the same time, he planted a bunch of trees there in the yard. So he's serving elsewhere at this time. He leaves. He comes back, and 7 years later. The building was built in 1882 in the fall, and commissioned on the Feast of St. Joseph, which is March the 19th. Okay, so of 1883. So he leaves. He comes back in 1890. Sees that the trees he planted have grown really tall, and he's really happy about that. But he said, but they're blocking the statue of St. Joseph. So he said, what we need to do is bring him out of this niche and put him on this pedestal. And so they built a pedestal and put it right in front of the opening there and put St. Joseph there. But apparently the people, and then some men from St. Alphonsus had raised the money for the pedestal. But apparently they just looked at the building and said, oh, it says 1882 on it. So it must have been March 19th, 1882 when they commissioned it, when really it was 1883. And so I found that, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's something written in stone is wrong here. And I immediately had to go tell everybody, and everybody's like, what are you talking about?
So you got correct history there.
That's right.
Oh, very good.
I told one of the sisters, she said, well, we're not going to fix it. And I said, yeah, I don't blame you for that, but I just want you to know.
Yeah, that's a minor typo, definitely, over the years. Okay, now the chapel, built in 1929, and of course that was built right before the Great Depression. The timing a little bit bad there, right?
Right. Yeah, I was talking to a group here a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I really used the chapel as a metaphor for the sisters in that, lots of good things, but always a challenge. And that was one. They had been trying to build basically the community had just grown so much and they needed a bigger chapel. The original chapel was in where the museum has been, and it's pretty small. So they needed a place, and they wanted it built in the center of campus because God is at the center of their lives. And so they had to get permission from the bishops back then, and it took a long time, and they finally got the permission, and they borrowed like $100,000, which in our days, our current term would be about $1.4 million. And so they got it finished, in 1929, and then almost immediately the Great Depression hit. So something great, but at the same time, and immediately a problem. And so there's so many letters back and forth from the superiors in the next decade of, schools saying, well, we can't pay you because we don't have any money. And so, people are, there's a note from the Mother Superior to the farm workers saying, we're going to have to, there's no money. We have to pay off this debt. And so we're cutting your salaries I forget what it's in the book, 75 cents or something like that. But you do get a cow. So you can have plenty to eat, so you're going to starve to death. But
well, I understand also they in your book they had to raise the tuition during that time to help cover costs, and so. But you had students that actually lived on campus and commuters, I guess.
Yeah, both.
Right. Yeah, Sister Ruth was a
I was a boarding student there for 4 years, and it was wonderful. But in the early days, I think it was much more primitive, and the things we lived pretty comfortably, but I think in the earlier days, the sisters and everybody, it was a challenge to make everything come together. So
now
back to our
tour there. Beautiful stained glass windows in the chapel. Yeah. I mean, they're really striking. Those really are nice.
Yeah, from Germany they were.
Oh, they are?
Well, I think Dan probably knows this more than I do, but they started to be from Germany. And then when the war came, the Second World War, is this right?
Right, yeah, there's a story in there that we had ordered a window from the Emil Frey place that makes stained glass windows in Berlin, I think it was. And they'd ordered them, and they were supposed to be shipped, but they were done, but they couldn't ship them because World War II started. And so we just had to wait, and finally they just made them they have an office in St. Louis as well. So eventually those windows got made in St. Louis to bring here. But yeah, they were ready to go. I
wonder if they actually survived the war.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We never sold them.
With all the bombing in Berlin.
Yeah. But a lot of people through the years donated windows to tell a particular story. So all those stories all those windows tell a story about something. And we put together a booklet back the first year I was there.
Now, there used to be pews in the chapel,
sure,
but now they're just chairs. Mm-hmm. And you said that's because of the sisters were getting older and were having trouble with the pews. Is that right, Sister Ruth?
Well, it's much more accessible. We were crawling over each other. Of course, people, still have pews in many places, and they manage. But we find having an individual chair for each sister, so if they want to move, they can move, and they don't have to crawl over somebody else. And so it's much more
There was also
accessible.
a movement among the churches, church higher-ups to make churches more, especially for a religious community, to make it a little bit more feminine. So there are a lot fewer sharp there aren't square.
Yeah.
Things are more
Yeah.
rounded, and it's just, it's you don't sit straight facing. You're sitting at a little bit of a curve, and so it is a little bit softer feel to it. But I think it's really nice. Now, some people.
Did you see the chapel when you were there?
Yes, it's beautiful. It really is beautiful. Now, also, there's a historic guest house, and that's the Blamer
Right.
Blamer family,
Right.
Big benefactors.
Right. Mother Augustine Blamer, back when the sisters were still part of the Ursulines of Louisville, they sent Mother Augustine down to kind of really amp up the education system. And her parents, she was an only child. Her parents were from Germany, and they would come because she was there. And really, they bought the farm property and donated it to the community. They built buildings. They were just sort of tended the grounds, Mr. Blamer and his wife. They got mad, took the farm back, eventually got over it, gave the farm back again. But after Mr. Blamer died, Mrs. Blamer wanted to be closer to her daughter. She was sort of the local superior there, and she had this house built for herself to live in, and she lived there for about 6 months and died. And in her will, she deeded the house to the community with the exception that it have to be used for a guest house for anybody coming to visit the sisters. And that was like in 1898, I think it is. And it's still the guest house. So if you come to visit the sisters there, you can still stay at the guest house.
And it's a lovely house.
It is. It really is. And you also have the memory garden, Sister Ruth.
Yes, that's one of Sister Amelia's projects. When she was director of development, she decided that we needed to have some kind of a fundraising activity that would, bring in a lot of support. And so we began to sell bricks. Bricks keep coming back in this story. So I don't remember how much a brick, had to donate for a brick, but the Memory Garden has a statue of St. Joseph, and then all around that are walls slantwise with the bricks in them, with names of all the people who donated. I don't know how many. How many people donated?
No, that was for the 125th anniversary. That was in 1999, so that was 125 years since they had arrived, and they wanted to do something to signify that. So.
And you have the Rosary Walk as well.
And that has bricks also around the side
so
of
you
it.
can actually say the Rosary while you're walking it, and we just finished all the bricks in that this year. So the final bricks are in that to finish.
And you have the building that houses the sisters. Of course, you have food service and medical care for the sisters as well.
Right.
That's really a more of a modern building there, and nice facility. I imagine I didn't have a chance to go inside.
It is very nice. The St. Joseph Villa is what it's called. It was opened 20 years ago this year, and they made the windows really deep so that they assumed a lot of sisters might be in wheelchairs, and so they wanted to be able to see the grounds, and so it was a lot of forethought went into that. And it's a really nice facility. If you've gone to a nursing home, to see somebody, you think, oh gosh, this is kind of maybe not the most cheerful place. This is a very bright, very very active place, and so the sisters have a lot of opportunity there.
And you, when I was touring the campus, you told me about the early days when it was really self-sufficient. You had your own dairy cows out there. Sure. Had a slaughterhouse as well. Everybody
Still have a slaughterhouse.
Oh, so they get fresh meat. Yep. That's good.
Yeah, really, the farm was probably the key to because the sisters separated from the Ursulines of Louisville and started their own community, and so there was some divisiveness there back in the early 1900s. Had it not been for this farm, they probably wouldn't have survived. Because a lot of communities that try to separate, they don't have their own, they're not that self-sufficient because the sisters had 17 acres at the time. When they got a 257-acre farm, suddenly they could have more animals, more places to garden, raise their own money, raise their own food. And so it could support all the sisters and the students without having to cost anything. You know, some of those early days, they talked about like sugar was a huge, that was sacrosanct. You didn't, because you had to buy sugar. You couldn't make your own sugar.
Okay.
Everything else.
So that was a luxury item.
A luxury item. So like a pound of sugar had to last a month. And so all the funny stories about how they just, got by with like, this is supposed to be jam, but it's really just stewed berries because there's not any sugar in it.
So not too many birthday cakes. I guess you could probably sneak one in.
They
Maybe
figured some way to do that other than using sugar, apparently.
Right. Now the cemetery on the hill, scenic spot. I mean, overlooks the countryside. It's just a beautiful spot up there. The graves of dozens of Ursuline sisters up there. Also, Father Volk is buried there.
Yeah.
Nice monument to him. And also the grave of Owensboro Diocese Bishop John McWraith.
Yes.
Right.
He wanted to be buried there.
And that was probably quite a procession to the cemetery there.
Right, procession from Owensboro, from the funeral. Father Bishop McWraith was such a huge friend to the farming community that a lot of the farmers along the way brought their tractors up
Really?
to the side of the road and stood there and waited for the procession to go by.
All the way from Owensboro.
All the way from Owensboro.
To the mountain.
Yeah.
Now, before we learn more about some of the memorable characters and events in the book, Hope and Firm Faith, let's learn more about my guests, Sister Ruth Garries and Dan Heckel. Now, Sister Ruth, you grew up in Evansville,
Yes.
to St. Benedict's.
Yes.
Did you go to Memorial High School then, or?
No, I went to Mount St. Joseph Academy.
Oh, you went straight from St. Benedict's to Mount St. Joseph.
Yes.
Oh, so what were those first days like there?
At Mount St. Joseph.
Yeah.
Well, I went against my will. My mother made me go, and I was ready to hate it. And within 3 days, I found, the other students were very welcoming. The sisters were very welcoming, and it didn't take me very long at all to decide that I, maybe would become an Ursuline sister. And my mother was shocked because I had rebelled against it so much. So it was an excellent education. It really was. And I really profited by that. And then, I did decide to enter the community.
So did you have daily chores?
Yes, yeah, we did. And that was just part of it, so we didn't, fuss about that. We all had that to do.
You worked in the dairy, is that right?
Well, that was when I was a novice. When we were in the novitiate, we had big jobs, like working in the dairy, working in the infirmary, to get us ready for what it was like to be an Ursuline sister. So, but my, I was fine with all that, I guess. But my big thing was that I wanted to be a teacher. I always had wanted to be a teacher. So the Ursulines were basically teachers at that time. So that's what I was.
And I understand one of your favorite subjects was journalism?
Yes, journalism.
Weren't you editor of the paper? Or?
I was editor of The Mount. It was called The Mount, and it was a monthly paper. But I learned how to do layout and all that kind of stuff when we had all the ads were on little wood blocks.
Yes, I know it.
And all the girls who were on the staff of the paper were mischievous and fun-loving, and we got extra time away from our dorm because we were working on the paper, and nobody knew how much fun we had down there.
Well, see, I was editor of my school newspaper, too, and I enjoyed the time with the staff. We had a great time putting that paper together.
Yeah.
Who printed the paper? Remember?
Greenville Chisholm, I guess, in whatever the predecessor of Greenville Chisholm was. I think it was.
Was it in Owensboro?
In Owensboro, yeah.
Printers did that? Okay. Now, so then you went on to your education, taught several areas, and a number of teaching assignments everywhere, it seems like, eventually becoming...
That's just Ursuline sisters.
Yeah, they move you around.
Yeah.
and eventually becoming president of Brescia University. And you probably know about the early years of Brescia. I think
Yeah, I walked on the
1950.
foundations.
Yeah, 1950, was that when it started in Owensboro?
Well, in 1925, at the Mount St. Joseph Junior College for Women was founded, and it was always very small, but it was a very strong business orientation and education, preparing teachers and preparing people for business. And so that went on until 1950, and then the people in Owensboro began to clamor for the college to move to Owensboro, which was a big jump, a big decision. And we had to convince the bishop that we should do that. So that happened in 1950. One of the things that was big in that was the GI Bill, because there were many men coming back wanting education, and they didn't want to, well, the bishop would not allow men to go to Mount St. Joseph College for Women. So that's how Brescia got to Owensboro.
A co-ed.
Yes,
college,
from the beginning.
Right. Okay. Now, Dan Heckel, newspaper guy, right?
Yeah, old newspaper
When did
guy.
you start working at newspapers?
Well, I worked on my college newspaper at Murray State University, and then I got a job at the Owensboro Messenger Inquirer, and when I graduated in 1986. So I was there for 21 years, I think.
So are you a Owensboro native?
No, I'm from Louisville.
Oh, you're from Louisville. Okay.
So I wanted someplace smaller to go to college, so I went out to the far western part of the state, and I slowly worked my way back east to Owensboro.
So what did you do at the newspaper? What?
Oh, I did a little bit of everything. I was a reporter and a columnist, and eventually an editor, and then editor of the paper for a few years, and then I got a really good job.
Yeah, you love your job now.
I do. I love it very much. As people say, I tell people, I use this journalism career to launch me into my true profession of working at a convent. But being a man at a convent is always good for party conversations and things.
Now, also community theater, I understand.
Oh, well, it's just a little fun thing that I do on the side. But a lot of wonderful people. We have a wonderful community theater called Theater Workshop of Owensboro. And so I went from a guy that just tried out for something one time just as a lark to, I've gotten to write some things and direct the show and act in some shows, and met a lot of good friends that way. So it's a different kind of a world. And some of the sisters come and see me in my productions. And
do they give you a critique?
No, they're very positive as
okay.
always.
That's good.
My castmates are usually terrified because it's like, oh my gosh, we have sisters in the crowd. They know what words are in this show, right? Yes, I have warned them.
So what's your favorite role, that acting role?
Oh gosh, the first leading role I had was in a show called Rabbit Hole, which the director had a lot of faith in me to do that. It's kind of a somber story, but it's really a really good play. And I was in Vanya, Sonia, Masha, and Spike, which is a very funny comedy. It won a Tony Award on Broadway, and I was in. Last thing I was in, I think, was 12 Angry Men. I was before COVID, so things have been a little bit slow since then to get back into the swing of things. But it's fun. I don't have much ego about it.
Well, you tell me now that you work at the Mother House and probably have a nice window view of the campus there. I bet that's nice to look out and see the countryside.
Well, it's still, after 15 years, I still some days, especially in the spring when the flowers are coming back in bloom, or in the fall when the trees are changing colors, I just think, I can't believe I work here. I mean, it's such as you know from working in the pressures of daily journalism to this. I mean, the sisters are so appreciative of everything that the staff does for them, and they love the book, and they keep thanking me for writing it and things like that, and just a wonderful place, and just to express your own spirituality and be encouraged in that every day. So I get to go. I'd worked there for a week, and I guess I'd worked there a couple of weeks, and my boss at the time, who was the community leader, said, "How are you liking it?" And I said, "Well, let me put it this way." I said, "Last week I worked a full week, and I went home and had dinner with my wife and my son every day. And that was the first time that I'd done that in my entire life." So I like it quite a bit.
Yes. Now, did you grow up in the Catholic Church then?
I did. my dad was Catholic, my mother was a Baptist, but we were all raised Catholic. So it helped. You don't have to be Catholic to work at the Mount, but in my job, it certainly helps in communications to be able to understand all the lingo and, and the way the processes work. But I've learned so much more about my faith, and certainly about the sisters since I've worked there. So there's such a mystique about. The nuns, what are they going to be like? And, they're going to be mean and so forth. And people are always sort of stunned. It's like, well, she just seems like a really nice person. I was like, yeah, she's a very nice person.
Well, in some of the photographs, there's some stern-looking people in those photographs. And you look at old photographs of anybody, it seemed like they didn't smile.
No, I don't know why that was. Maybe the teeth were bad.
Maybe that's what it was. But
nobody was allowed to be happy back in those days.
It just seemed like everybody was very stern, but that wasn't the case at all. Everybody had a good time, it sounds like. I'm curious, Sister Ruth, what was the daily routine at Mount St. Joseph Academy when you were a student there?
Well, we were at a convent, and we didn't have to do everything that the sisters did, but we had to get up early in the morning and all go to breakfast together. And, of course, we ate whatever was there, which was good. At that time, it was very good. And then we went to school, and we had good teachers. I was playing around with music before I got there, and ended up being either you performed or you didn't. And so I did well because I had to work, and we all had to work. So a lot of the young women who were there when I was there and otherwise have done really well. And we have a wonderful alumni association, are very loyal. They're still coming back long after the school has been gone. So
what'd you do for fun?
Got into mischief.
Can't imagine the girls.
Well, there was one thing. On the Academy building was a cupola way up high, and we were totally forbidden to go up there. Well,
which means we got to go up there.
All of us had to have our name written on the wood up there, and that. So we did stuff like that. But we had a lot of fun, and we could go to Owensboro and go to movies and things like that if we could find transportation. And there was actually a bus at that time, so that helped. But and we prayed more than normal students pray, I imagine, because when the nuns were praying, we were supposed to be praying too. But it was good. We went to bed all together and in an alcoves with curtains and. So
it was a dormitory?
A dormitory. And at night after silence time, we threw oranges over the top of the curtains to each other, and schoolgirl stuff.
I understand you also had a concert on the lawn. That was a big deal?
Right. The professor music professor at Brescia College had started this program I forget the official name of it, but everybody just called it Music at Maple Mount. And we had students eventually from all over the country that would come and learn from these experts during the summer, and then they would put on a concert at the conclusion of that, and it eventually moved to the valley. There's a big valley in the front of the campus, and so people would sit up on the lawn and listen to the Owensboro Symphony perform, and it was a major event every summer at the Mount.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dan, of course, you did a lot of research on this book. How many years?
4 years.
4 years of your life immersed in this. Did you share the tales with your wife of what you discovered?
Yeah, well, especially she's a good soul, because when you're writing a history or researching a history, you're the only person.
We got to share some of these things.
So it's like, okay, I found this really cool thing, and so if you're with somebody who's like, I'm really sick of you talking about that, it really probably is difficult. But my wife is a very good natured person, and she would always at least feign interest in what I was talking about. Of course, in the midst of my research, COVID hit. And so my staff, along with some of the other administrative staff, started working from home. We just couldn't come to the Mount anymore. So that made it really difficult because I couldn't take things out of the archive. So I started researching whatever I could, and then I would get permission to kind of come in one day a month and I would just lock myself in the archive with my peanut butter sandwich and start grabbing everything I could to make copies of. And so I would come home with a big stack of those and spread it out on the living room floor to organize my thoughts. And So I would just tell my wife, Sherry, don't come through here because you're not going to be able to get through.
Well, and your book has a lot of great little, they call it collages, little vignettes about certain events in the history of the Ursuline sisters, and came across some interesting one. Mother Augustine, she was an artist, was that right? Did handicrafts or something like that?
I thought I
Probably. I don't remember that part of her.
Of course, in early missions to Oklahoma, Nebraska, New Mexico, even Chile.
Right.
That was in the 50s, 1950s, the Chile.
Yeah. And then we talk about in the book from Spanish flu to COVID, dealing with adversity. Some of the sisters, I think, dealt with some of the soldiers in Louisville that came down with
Camp
Spanish.
Taylor in Louisville was one of the largest places where they trained a lot of.
This was World War One.
World War One, yes. And the Spanish flu had hit, of course, in 1918. And so the sisters, we had 3 convents in Louisville where the sisters taught at the schools there. And so a lot of they didn't have enough nurses to work at this camp. And so the bishop had put out a call, I think, for people to come, and if the religious communities would come and volunteer to help. They didn't have to be nurses, but if they could just do some basic things to help, because everybody was so overwhelmed there. And so the superior at the time allowed one sister from each of the 3 houses in Louisville to go and work and help with the soldiers who were suffering from the effects of the Spanish flu. And they didn't last very long. I mean, none of them died, but I mean, they all got it within a couple of weeks and ended up going home. So we didn't lose any sisters in that, amazingly enough. But I mean, the stories that they tell, that's like, basically they were there to take temperatures and, get them whatever the soldiers could use. But, we didn't have really medicine. Basically, we gave them whiskey and whiskey and a prayer. And so they would come back the next day and beds would be emptied, and it meant, you hoped it meant that they got better, but usually it meant that they died overnight. So it was just, as much as we've experienced in COVID, it was even more horrific, it seems like.
Well, how did the sisters fare during COVID, Sister Ruth?
The first year of COVID was pretty rough. Several of our sisters who were in the infirmary and already fragile died. And so we had about 6 deaths in 2 months or something like that. And that was very sobering. But after that, and of course after the vaccines came, that was much better. But, the isolation, and of course we were wearing masks all the time, and we weren't able to get out and do things that we usually did. We were limited, and the lay staff, we were, we had to be careful not to get too close to anybody, all that. It was challenging.
You actually got to go and visit with sisters in their rooms to bring them their meals during that time, didn't you? In the infirmary?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I did that one time. But I was quarantined for a while. I went to the hospital with someone who went to the emergency room, and she was diagnosed with COVID, and the doctor said, or the nurse said, well, you have to be quarantined, to her. You have to be quarantined for 14 days. And I said, what about me? Yeah, you too. So somebody had to bring my meals to me for 14 days. So we have closed circuit TV in our room that connects with the chapel. So we're able to go to Mass and prayers on TV during that time. And the sisters in the infirmary are able to do that. So that's a great gift.
Now, there's something in the book, and I didn't quite understand, the Great Silence. What was that?
Well, after 9 o'clock at night, I think it was 9 o'clock, we weren't supposed to speak anymore, and that was in the community. We were supposed to be praying and taking care of religious things and not talking to each other.
Wasn't there another great silence too about?
Yeah, there's a silence, and then it's like, well, but if you needed to say something, I guess you could. And then the great silence.
Oh,
like,
okay,
no.
So
That's
there's two different levels of silence.
Levels of silence.
That's very common in cloistered communities, and we were sort of semi-cloistered. We got over that.
So now, what's the future for the Ursuline sisters?
Well, good question.
Yeah.
But still, there, when I got towards the end of the research and writing the book, I thought, it's getting to get a little glum because the numbers are much smaller
and you're closing parts
buildings
of the campus.
But I mean, one of the last things that I wrote in the book said, the story is still being written. And so every time you interact with an Ursuline sister, that's a new opportunity to be closer to God and to understand what they're about and how that kind of spirituality and that faith, and that hope and firm faith, the name of the book, that's very much an Ursuline thing. The title of the book was Book for quite a long time while I was working on it. The book, yes, that was what I kept calling it. So I thought I got to come up with a title for this, but I thought I'm going to wait till I get all the research done to figure out what it is. And that's a St. Angela quote about having hope and firm faith in God. And that really is really the theme throughout all of the sisters' lives that you meet in this book. And I wanted to, it is a history book, but I wanted to call it the story of the Ursuline sisters because it really is, one continuous story made up of thousands of other little stories. Because people tend to think, history is just going to be a bunch of facts, and it's not going to be very, it's good for a textbook, but you don't want to sit down and read it. And I was not at all interested in writing that book. So what I've been told by the sisters who've read it and other friends of mine who are reading it are just to say, it's a good read. It's easy to read. It's not too heavy. Not too many. There's no test at the end of each chapter.
And there's interesting stories. I mean, each one of these individuals, they had their own backgrounds and everything. Many from Germany. They came over here not knowing any English and having to adapt to a wilderness environment. Those early sisters, some of the stories were incredible.
Yeah. And they had come from cities. The original Ursulines, they had been in Straubing, Germany, and they had a beautiful, Sister Ruth, have you been to Straubing?
Yes, yeah. I lived there for a year.
Right. So, they had a beautiful convent there, in sort of an urban area. When they came to Louisville, they were certainly in downtown Louisville. So all their experiences had been in cities, and then they come, not only do you put them on a flatboat and put them on a river and send them west, they get there and they're like, what is this? We're out in the middle of nowhere here.
And then they go from the Kentucky Holy Land to like New Mexico.
Yeah, and Nebraska. And
to other rural environments.
Yeah. Right.
Wow.
New Mexico had only been a state for like 7 years when the sisters first went there in 1919. But, the people in New Mexico who still remember the sisters there are so devoted and so passionate about what the sisters were able to do for them because just my research on that was interesting.
Well, you told me about that one sister who died, and she wanted to be buried at the mother house, or they wanted to move her to the mother house, but they couldn't move the body.
Right. Well, Sister George Marie Morgan, she died in New Mexico. For many umpteen years, all of our sisters are buried at Maple Mount, and Sister George Marie has a headstone there, but she's not buried there. She was buried. I guess it was during the cholera epidemic a little bit. And people were kind of like, no, we're not. It was expensive, and people were like, I don't know if we want to do this or not. So she's buried in New Mexico, and there was an effort at some point over the years to actually exhume her and bring her to the Mount. But the bishop at the time said, no, we're not going to do that. So.
Now, is the campus area open to the public?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, people can always come and just walk around, certainly outside. And of course, if you want to come visit sisters, all you just we just kind of call Ed, make sure she's there. And now that COVID's gotten a lot better, we're a little bit more open than we used to be. But people can always come. It's not a cloister. It's not a place that the public can't come to. And it's like I say, the memory garden, the memorial, rosary
people
wall.
could just come and walk around and
well, I think the cemetery, that is just
beautiful.
Really unique. It really is a very nice setup there up on that hillside. It's just really
incredibly
beautiful.
Peaceful.
It is. Well, my thanks to Sister Ruth Garys, celebrating 70 years with the sisterhood. great career. I'm sure you have great memories.
Great adventures.
I'm definitely a lot of adventures.
Yes.
You've been to a lot of places and met some fabulous people
Yes.
in your lifetime. And also, Dan Heckel, thank you for sharing the story of the Sisters of Mount St. Joseph, where as we said, the legacy of St. Angela continues with hope and firm faith in God. That's always good to remember. Thanks again.
Thank you,
Thank you, David.
I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street.